Hey there, beautiful human. My name's Dan Kalapski, for those of you that I haven't met. I've just come back from a pretty exciting conference called Southstart, a startup conference full of innovation. Now, the three pieces I'm going to share with you are the nervous system capacity of a room full of founders and what I found, then the conversation that I had with Derek Sivers. If you haven't heard of him, then you should definitely listen to one of his podcasts, one of his 250 podcasts that he's been interviewed on. And then I'm going to share with you a little bit on what was a common thread throughout the entire conference, which was AI and the balance between AI and human. So let's get started. The talk that I had delivered was around, well, the title of the talk was You Can't Biohack Your Way to Peak Performance. And to set the record straight, I'm a big fan of biohacking. However, biohacking attends to a very specific layer. And beneath that layer, there's incomplete stress responses that we need to attend to. Otherwise, it's like driving a car with the handbrake on when we're trying to, add more power, do the biohacking, but we're still feeling laggy. We still feel a little slower and not as full of energy as we would love. And so, yeah, essentially in the talk, what was quite beautiful was there was this visual display that I'm going to share with you now. Okay, so I had the entire room full of founders rate their capacity to be able to activate and to be able to genuinely relax. And I was super curious to see what the numbers were. Now, what came up was these are all the lines of each of the founders in the room, and capacity to activate, the average was 7.8, and the capacity to down regulate was 5.8. Now, this here with the capacity to relax and genuinely, come into a place of restoration to then return to baseline is quite common in terms of what we might see at one of our retreats or whenever we're working with founders. And so that recovery piece is super, super important. And so the main takeaway for the leaders and founders from rating their capacity for activation and relaxation is that it's also important to allow for genuine relaxation and a genuine restoration to allow a return to baseline. Yeah. Now, the reason why this might be difficult for founders, but not just founders, humans altogether. The way to increase your window for both activation and healthy activation and relaxation is to start to get good at processing new stress responses that are arising and older stress responses from the first 8 years of your life and everything in between. And so these stress responses, I'm going to take you through now as to what they actually are, and letting you know what you can do about those. A little bit more about these incomplete stress cycles, stress responses that can sit in the low brain. And these might be incomplete stress responses from the last 2 weeks as a result of difficult conversations that we may have had, or from the first 8 years of our life and everything in between. Okay, we also call it an energy cycle because the stress response that comes from the body, it's an energy running through the body. And you run through flight, fight, freeze, contemplation, completion. Now I'm zipping through this. This here is a cycle that is super normal for your nervous system to go through, right? And it might occur in micro or macro ways, such as a difficult conversation that happened in the last 2 weeks, or maybe it was a much larger stress in your childhood years. Either way, the nervous system goes through this cycle, and it's normal for it to go through flight, fight, freeze, and contemplation. Whenever we're in any of these, it's not all that pleasant. And so it's super reasonable that we might be trying to resist that or get out of the sensation of being in flight or fight or freeze. But actually, what we're wanting to do is to bring in a level of presence to the energy that's running through the body to allow it to move through. And there's a few things we can do around that as well. The important piece here is that this also runs through a bell curve. So essentially, with a bell curve, I love bell curves. If you haven't already noticed that I tend to reference them a fair bit. Essentially, you've got the bell curve where you've got activation. So one side, the fight flight, is an activation phase of the stress response. And then the freeze and contemplation is a more passive parasympathetic response by the nervous system. And these bell curves, we see them everywhere. We see them in our year, in phases of the business, in phases of a relationship. Yeah, there might be a lot happening, and then there might be a bit more of a downward turn, and not a downward turn, but there might be a bit more, a bit more of a, not even a lull. Let's just say pulsating in and out. Yeah, two humans pulsating in and out, and there's a lot going on, and then it quietens down a little bit, which is so healthy. Quietening down, it's our capacity to be with the moments where it quietens down that is really useful and healthy. This is the exact same bell curve that we follow in each and every one of our breathwork sessions, whether it's one-to-one or group breathwork. It's also the bell curve. I design the entire retreat intentionally around from day 1 to day 6, activation, relaxation. You can see that that follows the same bell curve. And we make sure that we have a holistic, integrated approach where we're attending to mind and body. But with the FBR breath work, it gives us an opportunity to create the conditions to allow these incomplete stress responses to come to more of a completion or to be completed and move from the low brain into the midbrain. Deep Dive Reset Retreat. If anyone's interested, it's there. Now, the environment, this picture's so telling because the environment is so important for the nervous system, and asking yourself, what's the environment that you find yourself in on a day-to-day basis, and how do you cultivate that environment for yourself? Whether it's the working environment or the environment that you're stepping into to allow for genuine recovery. Yeah, that moment after activation for that genuine recovery to occur, that genuine restoration to occur. So this is one of our retreats, and the environment is one of the key elements that I choose the retreat location on. So I'm there doing my talk, and I saw this human sitting in the front row to the left, and super well dressed, black suit, black top. And there was just something about him, and he was looking quite familiar. And I thought to myself, where do I know him from? Maybe he's from EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. I'd done a fair bit of work with them. I'm not sure, but I'll approach him later, right? The session finished, and I saw him in the courtyard. So I walked up to him, introduced myself, and I didn't need to introduce myself because he'd come to the talk. But I'd walked up to him and let him know that I noticed that he was in my talk, and asked him who he was, and he had a bit of a chuckle, and then he turned around his name tag, and there he was, Derek Sivers. Now, if you don't know Derek Sivers, I first came across Derek 15 years ago, listening to a Tim Ferriss podcast. Tim Ferriss had interviewed him. And it was the first time that I'd heard the line, how you do anything is how you do everything. And it's been something that I've integrated and applied to, and has really spoken well to a lot of the work that I'm doing one-to-one and in group capacities with leaders and founders. Yeah. And so it was quite special for me to have a conversation there and have the opportunity to connect with him in this way. Now, Derek hadn't done a talk in 6 years. He moved to Singapore from the US, then he moved to New Zealand. And essentially, he's a really interesting character, a really interesting cat, and all about, data sovereignty and our sovereignty online, and an artist by trade, but also big in terms of a lot of the tech that he works with and so on and so on. Now, it was quite interesting to hear, if you're a parent, He had moved to New Zealand solely for his one child, his son, who he really wanted to raise in a way where it was immersed in nature. And New Zealand provided the opportunity for that. And he'd also said that there was a parenting question that had been put forth to him, and he had said that his son hadn't seen him on a screen until the age of 12. Any screen until the age of 12. And that's a pretty solid effort to go 12 years without being seen on this screen by your child. And so, yeah, obviously he's pretty big on how us humans can run business. He's an incredibly successful business person, and how we can maintain our connection with nature, with ourselves, and so on and so on. And so Derek was surprised that AI was at the very forefront of the entire conference. His talk really came down to, and the conversation that I had with him, because he had shared it a little bit, he had gotten his talk mixed up. He thought he was starting, so he had to scrap that talk and create a new one because he was actually speaking last. And he shared his talk and where he was at with it and so on. And he was talking about how we we need to prove that we are we are human, sorry. So it's getting to the point where it's AI until proven human. It's almost this competition as to who can do human better. And he, for a long time, he has responded to every one of his emails and gone to an effort to actually, go and learn a little bit about the person and then share that with them in the email. Now, AI can do that as well. He's recently completed an audiobook, and in the audiobook, he would go into a characterization that would make no sense for AI to go into, just to bring in that human element and let it be felt as real as human. And in this exploration, he sees that the competitive advantage for businesses, business owners, entrepreneurs is how much can you preserve the human element in and through your business. And so it's quite ironic that my two takeaways were, okay, how do I jump onto Claude Cowork and automate a whole bunch of repetitive tasks that I would normally be paying an assistant to do, or be doing some of those myself? So automating all of that. How do I integrate AI into the business? And the other takeaway being, how do I allow my business to remain and preserve a deeply rooted sense of humanness about it and connection with the people that I'm working with? And that's a real beautiful, fun, playful, artistic mission that I think many business owners are going to go on as we move forward and this AI piece rapidly accelerates. I don't know if you can hear the rain, but it's quite beautiful here when you see when the chaos starts to come through with the rain. So I'm going to actually turn the camera around and show you some of that. 2 seconds. And so if you are looking to work with AI, Claude Cowork has been huge, but it's moving so quickly that it's changing every day, every week. Claude Cowork is essentially what Claude Bot does. Claude Bot was the completely agentic AI, which you give it one line worth of prompt, and it'll go off and do that. It'll make a call for you. It'll do the research it needs to be able to have a conversation with so on and so on and so on. But it can be a little bit risky in terms of security and so on, and you need to look to isolate Claude Bot. Claude Bot, I think it's Claude Bot. You need to isolate it by using a VPS or a Mac Mini. And so the other option is Claude Cowork, which apparently, and Claude Code, which are doing a very similar job with much more security. And so that's a focus point for me that I'll be integrating that for a lot of back end tasks and operations. Overall, Southstart was an awesome conference to connect with a whole bunch of humans, connect with Derek Sivers, to do the talk on stage, fireside chat with a good friend of mine, Dave Murphy, and to, yeah, be surrounded by a bunch of incredibly creative human beings that are really looking to make an impact in the world. I'll see you in the next video. Let me know any content that you're screaming out for or would love me to speak to. Together in deep work, rest, and play.